want to get back to the energy crisis that this country is facing, with our grid under more and more pressure, as we know. We've had warnings that we could have blackouts this year, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria. Victoria is facing the prospect of running out of gas, which is completely ridiculous given they're sitting on top of massive gas reserves. Now, despite that, the Labor government, and we're going to have an election either this year or next year, will continue to push this rush toward green policies. Now, their policy is they want to reach 50% renewable energy by 2030. Think about that, 2030. Not long away, that's about 5 and a bit years. And 100% renewable energy using solar and wind and a bit of hydro, no coal and very little gas. It's a hell of an ambitious target, but is this the path we ought to be going down, given the energy assets that we have in this country? And look what it's doing to our electricity and gas bills. Now, joining us tonight to discuss this is energy economist and author of this book. It's called The Unpopular Truth About Electricity and the Future of Energy. We're joined by Dr. Lars Schernikau, who is in our Queensland studio. Doctor, I mean, we've seen this playbook before, haven't we? Germany went down a similar path to the one we're attempting to go down. How's it turned out for them, and how's it going to turn out for us, do you think?
Well, thank you. Greetings, Kenny. Germany has not had the best experience when it comes to energy. If you think about it, Germany has been in the so-called Energiewende, energy transition in German, for about 20 years and spent about $1 trillion roughly on it. And energy bills have gone through the roof. The energy prices have multiplied in those 20 years. So I don't think it's gone very well.
So we're told renewables are the cheapest form of energy. Is that right?
It's an interesting one. There is a measure called levelized cost of electricity, LCOE, which actually shows that wind and solar are very cheap. And the problem is that the way this measure works, you cannot compare it, and especially not use it for wind and solar. If you think about it, electricity is not a product. It's not a kilowatt hour. Electricity is actually a service. It's to have electricity available all the time when you need it. And you have to price this in a different manner, because you actually have to have a whole system that's required to make electricity available. And by just counting kilowatt hour generated by a solar panel and costing that does not give you the system cost. And that's the problem when people say that wind and solar is cheap. It's actually not when it comes at a total system level.
And what they don't factor into that, Doctor, is, of course, that solar panels and wind turbines have an end of life. They have a use-by date. I mean, they don't last forever. And, you know, when you have the nuclear debate, that's completely different. So we would have to replace all of these millions of solar panels and wind turbines at some point. And then you have the question, of course, is what's it going to do to your landscape?
I mean, absolutely. If you think about it, there's actually 3 problems with wind and solar. Number one is the energy density. There's only so much energy available per square meter that comes from the sun or from the wind that you can use. You have to collect. The second is actually the intermittency, right? It's not available all the time. That means you have to have storage systems, backup systems. You have to have a whole system to manage it, transmission infrastructure. And the third one is what you just said. The third one actually is the fact that it doesn't last very long. That means you have to replace this entire infrastructure every few years. And the most modern solar panels that are produced now in China for utility scale, they don't last anymore 20, 25 years. They last 12, 15 years. They're so optimized, they're so thin that they don't work. But Kenny, look, I mean, to take a step back, let's understand. We need to see a way forward when it comes to energy. We need to invest in the future of energy. And I call it the new energy revolution. And we cannot forever dig, fossil fuels out of the ground. I mean, when I say forever, not for hundreds, thousands of years. We have a few hundred years left, definitely. The problem is that by finding this solution, we have to invest in R&D to find that. And of course, fusion, fission is part of that. There's maybe geothermal part of that. I don't know. There's other things we don't even know yet. But one thing is that just pure physics dictates that wind and solar in its current form cannot ever be part of that solution, unfortunately.
Very smart man once said to me, if you set a deadline, you're going to have to meet that deadline. You're pushing yourself into a corner. We're just trying to rush this stuff too quickly, I think, Lars. That's the problem. I mean, you look at Melbourne, for example, in southern Australia. Next week, 3 or 4 days, the top temperature is going to be around 11 or 12 degrees Celsius. There's going to be no wind. It's going to be still, and there's going to be heavy cloud cover. And so you're not going to have much sunshine. I mean, by we're going to have 50% of our electricity generated by wind and sun. How's that going to work next winter in Melbourne?
Well, of course, it cannot work without significant backup systems. In the future, of course, there's the belief that storage can replace that backup system. But the fact is today is that it's coal and gas-fired power that has to be on standby, has to be available. And obviously, the more wind and solar you have, the less you utilize those backup systems, the higher the cost becomes. Again, contributing to the total system cost. So no, it doesn't work. If you now turn off your power stations, as Germany has turned off all its nuclear, and it's planning to turn off all its coal, and I think there's similar plans here in Australia, you're going to run into trouble. I mean, the lights will literally turn off.
There'll be some level-headed people around the world looking at Australia saying, these people are crazy. I mean, we've got huge reserves of gas. We've got, okay, you can argue that perhaps coal has to be phased out, but not immediately. We've got lots of it. We've got huge amounts of uranium, and yet we're having an argument about not ever having nuclear. We don't have much energy that comes from hydro. But why would a country not utilise its best assets, which it exists in the ground and owns?
I mean, I don't know. Look, honestly, for me, this debate actually is not political. I know it's often made political by both sides of the spectrum. For me, it's not. For me, it's the basis of who we are, our development, our human, our industrial development. And of course, you always need a mix of resources to use. And Australia is so lucky you have these resources in the ground. You are one of the major coal exporters in the world. You have the cheapest form of electricity that's coming from coal worldwide. I mean, 36% globally comes from coal. China, 55, almost 60% comes from coal. India, 70%, almost 70% comes from coal. And Australia is planning to turn it off. It doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. You have to use your own resources at the lowest cost, the least environmental impact. How you do that? By investing in it. Putting up the newest coal-fired power technology. Putting up the newest, mining technology. You have some amazing high-quality operative mines that I've seen here. So use that. It's much cheaper, much better, much cleaner for the environment. Because as you said, for wind and solar, there's a few things you need. And where do those things come from? They don't come from Australia, or not all of it.
Your book's called The Unpopular Truth About Electricity and the Future of Energy. In summary, what does that tell me if I read that book? Well,
it basically tells you what we just talked about, that if you think about the future, we have to invest in this new energy revolution. We have to invest in R&D to find that new, cleaner, more efficient, more energy-dense source of power. And that takes R&D. And until we have this solution, what you have to do, you have to invest in your existing system, which is today, when it comes to electricity, of course, coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, geothermal, all those things. But don't forget, energy is not just electricity. Electricity is only 40% of total primary energy use. There's 60% that's for transportation, for heat, for industrial use. People forget these things. And when Germany says, we are now majority renewable, well, then the fact is that they are 35% roughly wind and solar electricity. And total energy, after 20 years and $1 trillion, 6% primary energy use from wind and solar. So this gives you a sense that there's much, much more than just electricity, and it's a bit more complex.
We're so lucky
to be able to... And the book explains these concepts.
We're so lucky to be able to tap into your expertise on this, Lars. Thank you very much for your time tonight.